skipping your AC tune-up this year? Think again. Don't spend another season hoping your air conditioner works. Be sure with help from the team at Legacy. An annual tune-up keeps your AC running safely and efficiently when you need it most. Avoid costly repairs, breakdowns, and keep your AC running for years to come. Visit LegacyHeatingandAirInc.com for easy online scheduling and special offers and discounts. While you're there, sign up for an annual maintenance plan starting at just $13 a month and leave the worry to us.
Welcome to a very special recruiting edition of Football Never Sleeps on a Saturday afternoon with two guys that know very little bit about technology and none of my grandchildren here to help us through it in case we do hit a snag. I'm Eric Hansen. He's Tom Lemming, and we're going to be talking Notre Dame football recruiting for the next hour. We're also going to be taking your questions live, so start filling up the question queue, and we'll work them in as we work into our conversations. Tom has been a recruiting analyst, not since I've been in diapers because I wasn't wearing diapers in my 20s, but for a long time. He is the editor and publisher and creator of the Prep Football Report, and we're going to get into some details about how you can order that a little bit later in the show. Tom, is today the digital release day for that?
Yeah, actually, the digital will be released tomorrow.
Okay, tomorrow. So we are going to get right into the recruiting stuff right now for Notre Dame football. So we're taking stock of Notre Dame football recruiting in late July of 2024 as the 2025 cycle moves into the stretch run and the 2026 cycle heats up. Notre Dame sits at 21 verbal commitments in its 2025 class, hoping to add a few more prospects before the early signing period, which this year has been moved way up to December 4th through 6th. That's actually before the transfer portal opens this time. As a reminder, to help us conquer YouTube's algorithm, please like, subscribe, and share this video. And again, I'd like to introduce Tom Lemming of Prep Football Report. Tom Lemming, prepfootball.com. I'm going to put that on the screen for you guys because you can get all the information about his website and his products. And then I'm also going to tell you about a free trial for our website later in the show for the premium content. So Tom looks like he's in his car, and that's because he is. He is coming back, I believe, from North Carolina. So why don't you tell us about your trip and who you saw and what their impression of Notre Dame was on your trip?
Well, I normally don't travel during the summer, but I have promised Mike Elko, when he was at Duke, that I'd do a prospect day, kind of helping them out. But it was going to be January. Then they moved on to Texas A&M. So the new staff asked if I would do it, and I said I couldn't do it in January. I'm doing it at North Carolina State. So then in April, I couldn't do it. So I had to come and do this. So I'm driving 2,000 miles in just 4 days. I'm on the other side of Louisville right now, so I'm not that far from Chicago, maybe another 6 hours of driving. But so I stopped. It was pretty good. I actually was in Knoxville. There's some good – Knoxville Catholic High School's got 5 outstanding freshmen, and I think they're all going to be Power 5. So it's a Catholic school, so Notre Dame could at least have a leg up, you would think, even though it's in the South. And in North Carolina, Notre Dame's offered some of the players I had seen already yesterday. And there's always a favorable opinion of Notre Dame. The parents talk academics, maybe even more so in the past. Now, because of NIL, they talk a great game, but a lot of times it just comes down to NIL money at the very end with the impact type players. That's the reason why Notre Dame doesn't land a whole lot of top 50 players, because even though they're looking at the academics, they're looking at the tradition, how many guys you put in the NFL, NIL comes along, and some of the Southern schools can outbid Notre Dame for the most part.
Okay. So when you talk to prospects, how is NIL coming up right? Are they upfront about it, the kids, or does it not really come up in conversation when you're talking to them about their favorite schools?
It's exceptionally important now, but they don't like to talk about it. They've been told by their handlers or their parents or their high school coaches, don't talk about it. So I can get some info out of them or their parents if I sit around. Like yesterday, I got there very early, so I was talking to a lot of the parents in at Southern Durham High School. They all gathered at Southern Durham yesterday, and talking to some of them, they were talking about how they still give. There's some parents that still care about the academic side of it, but they're still very interested. And I can see why. We're talking about the coaches saying, well, you got to show loyalty to your state school. Don't worry about this or that. But do the coaches show loyalty to their state school once more money is being thrown at them? So I can see why, NIL is important, but I think hopefully someday you'll find some even ground there could be some more than just a handful of 20, 25 schools that are getting the majority of players. But right now that seems to be the case.
And before we move on to wide receiver recruiting in North Carolina, how do you think Notre Dame has been doing in that state lately? And also, how important is that state, do you think, should be? How much should Notre Dame prioritize North Carolina?
Well, it's a very important state because a lot of the kids have good academics in North Carolina as opposed to South Carolina. And I do think that when you look at it, Coach Kelly did a great job, and now Coach Freeman's doing a great job in North Carolina, probably even a better job when it comes to going after the top prospects. They're doing excellent. Notre Dame's name pops up there a lot more than it did, say, 13, 14, 15 years ago. Since I've been doing this 45 years, you never saw them that much into North Carolina. They were national, so they go at a couple of players, but now I had 70 players meet me in Raleigh back in January, and I would say a good 15 to 20 of the 70 mentioned Notre Dame, which means Notre Dame is pinpointing those players. And if they can get 2 or 3 or maybe sometimes 4 a year out of North Carolina, I think they're doing great. And as I mentioned, it's a good state for academics, and that's why I think Notre Dame has kind of zoomed in on North Carolina as they have in Texas, because there's some good areas of Texas academically. And the same could be said for California, particularly in the Trinity League, which is the best league in the country, loaded with most of them being Catholic schools.
Okay, and Jadon Blair, who recently verbally committed us from Winston-Salem, so that was a big get for Notre Dame out of North Carolina, the 4-star safety. Tom, let's dive into this wide receiver recruiting, and we're starting to load up in the question queue too, so we'll work some of these in. But let's look at Notre Dame traditionally with wide receiver recruiting, and let's start at the beginning of the Brian Kelly era. How would you characterize Notre Dame's wide receiver recruiting under Brian Kelly and Marcus Freeman?
It was very poor under Brian Kelly. Can't think of that many impact wide receivers. Kelly was a good offensive guy, but I think him and Tommy Reese did not do very well when it came to recruiting impact wide receivers or even quarterbacks. I mean, they always got a good quarterback, but now they're getting great quarterbacks. And I think when you're talking about wide receivers, they're the kind of guys, a lot of times you see them in the NFL or college that are a little bit more flamboyant, guys that want more attention put on themselves than, say, as the team type players. And Notre Dame has struggled with that position for a number of years. You and I were talking about it before. I can't believe there's only had 2 number 1 draft choices at that position since Tim Brown. I mean, that's to me amazing and very poor recruiting. You can't. And fans are saying, "Well, Mike Brown's not doing this or that." Mike Brown's a good recruiter. I knew he was doing well at Cincinnati. Did well at Wisconsin. The key, I think, right now is that they're in on the right guys. It's just that at the end, when you're after impact wide receivers, NIL, I think, plays a big thing. That's why with LSU, I think it did play a big thing with losing their big star out of Bishop Gorman. I do think that that played a part in it. I think Mike Brown did a good job. I was surprised they lost the kid down in Houston at Dekaney High School, because I thought, I was there that day in April when he ran a 10-400 meters to Nuke Hines, and he was leaning to Notre Dame at that time. And he mentioned their special teams coach as someone that he really enjoyed talking to. So something happened in between that time and possibly USC came up with more NIL. This is all speculation, but I do think that NIL is playing a big part in losing some of these big name guys.
So Tanook Hines, Dylan Robinson, and Derek Meadows were the three kids that went elsewhere last week that had the people that follow recruiting closely buzzing. Hines went to USC, Robinson to Washington, and you mentioned Meadows to LSU. So do you think this is, I know that there are fans that are concerned about it, and we can't tell them whether they should be worried or not. But what about the coaching staff? Should they be worried? And what can they learn from that 0 for 3 week that'll help them moving forward?
They shouldn't be worried at all. This is the best recruiting staff since Lou Holtz had that great recruiting staff in the late 80s, led by Vinny Serrato. You had Barry Alvarez, a lot of great recruiters on that staff. This staff is comparative to that one. And I think overall, Marcus Freeman's a much better recruiter than Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz, when he got to the home, was an outstanding recruiter. I don't think he enjoyed recruiting, rather golf than recruit. So like Tyrone Willingham and Coach Kelly, they're all golfers more than recruiters. But once they got into the home, they were good. The problem was getting them into the home. You don't have that problem with Marcus Freeman, who puts a lot of time and effort into recruiting. So overall, I think this is an outstanding staff that was plagued a little bit by the last couple of years by NIL all of a sudden just coming thrown at them. And I think Notre Dame didn't respond quickly enough as some of the other schools. Well, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Some of the other schools were NIL in it way before it was legal. So I think Notre Dame has slowly but surely moved their way up. And I don't see it as a major problem, except perhaps still top 50 ball players who some schools will throw a ton of money at them. And I think Notre Dame maybe, and I don't know if it's good or bad, will maybe take a step back when the kids are using them as leverage to get more money out of another school. And I don't like that at all, too. And I've seen a lot of players over the past 2 years. A good example, ball player's been committed a long time to one ball player. He'll commit to another one, but his eyes are on another school that's saying, okay, now the bidding starts. You want me to go here, or are you going to give me more money? And that has taken place with quite a few of the top ball players over the past 2-3 years. And I can see Notre Dame not wanting to get into bidding wars. They want ball players that are there academically and athletically, but also, obviously, since it's legal now, you could pay the ball players, but they don't want to get into bidding wars. And Nick Saban actually quit because of that. When he was talking to ball players, he said, instead of talking about how are you going to train me for the NFL, how are you going to make me a better person? No, they're asking for how much you're going to give me because this school's offered me this. And Nick got out of it right away, and I can understand why.
Okay, so Notre Dame has 2 receivers in this cycle so far, Jerome Bettis Jr. and Elijah Burris. So how would you characterize the potential of those 2?
I think limited. I think they're good, solid ball players, but they're not great ball players. Jerome is a great kid. I thought he'd be better as a free safety than as a wide receiver. I think when you're in high school, it does depend sometimes on quarterbacks, but you could be like a Cam Williams and you average 25 yards a catch because that's high school and you should be dominating. But when you see guys averaging 12 or 13 yards a catch, that could send up red flags to me. If you're a wide receiver, you're a tight end, maybe that's not too bad. But as a wide receiver, not doing great in high school stats-wise, that could send up a lot of red flags, as I said. So I think they've got a lot to prove. They're 2 good athletes. And who knows? With Mike Denbrock being a great offensive coordinator, I think Mike Brown's an excellent wide receiver coach. They've got a really good offensive staff. They've got a great running back coach. So I just think it's a matter of development now. But I don't see these guys as being lights-out type players and the kind of wide receiver that Notre Dame fans are expecting, which they haven't gotten in years. But every year they're like Chicago Cubs fans. Wait till next year. We'll get some great ones next year, but it just rarely happens. So I think Marcus probably has to himself zoom in also and help out Mike Brown and maybe collectively go at these top wide receivers and bring in more than you're normally bringing in. I think that's important also. Maybe you're zeroing in on 9 or 10, zero in on 19 or 20. I think it's the one position that's the easiest to recruit because there's so many wide receivers nationally. So you just got to recruit a little bit more and stay on top of them. And what I think Notre Dame does very well now that the previous staff hadn't done is it's perseverance and personality. They're on top of these guys as sophomores. I think Chad Bowden and his staff has done a good job with that. And I do think that really helps. So I'm very impressed with the Notre Dame recruiting staff. And I think they've weathered the NIL as well as most schools, except for the powerhouses that have thrown money at the kids like Ohio State and Missouri and Alabama, Georgia, USC, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Florida. And now Michigan's doing the same because they had to keep pace with Ohio State. They weren't doing it. They were sort of in the same ballpark as Notre Dame when it came to NIL, but now they're getting out there too because their fans demanded that stay pace with Ohio State, who seemed to be lapping the whole track NIL stuff this past year. So it's an interesting subject and it's tough to follow. I go see everybody in person and I do ask the kids now the NIL question. I ask them, is this important? A lot of times they're savvy enough to say, no, academics. There was a kid in Chicago and his mom told me last year, the key thing is distance from home and academics. And then they go down to Miami or Florida from Chicago, the farthest place you can go east of the Mississippi from the Chicago area, and a school that's not known for graduating their players. So you never know.
Okay, we'll keep the questions and comments coming. Xander, I think you need your own podcast here. You've got a lot of opinions. We'll address the questions here. We'll work these in. I'm going to jump into one while we're still talking wide receiver recruiting just to get the questions going, and then we'll jump back into the wide receiver discussion. Any word on Madden Framo and Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng making the decision anytime soon? Tom, what's your sense? And then I'll weigh in on that as well.
I could think either one could come at any time. Talking to both, because they're both, I help with the Butkus Award selection, and they're both two of our nominees are going to be announced pretty soon. And Madden's a great kid. I've seen him each of the last couple of years when I get out to Southern California. And he's friends with Asa, who's, I guess, doing great at Notre Dame. And we'll see a lot of action this year as a freshman. They're good friends. And matter of fact, I did a little video with those two and LeVar Arrington and his son last summer when I was in California. And I could tell the closeness of the two. So I think Notre Dame's got a good shot at Madden. Owasu, I think Bill McGregor told me, he played at DeMatha High School and was a big star as a freshman and sophomore. Then for some reason he went to IMG Academy where his stats kind of went way down just because they have so many players there. But McGregor thought he was one of the best defensive players he's ever had. And Bill's been there 40 years at a powerhouse school like DeMatha. So he's another big time catch if they could land him. But, they're going to do it on their own good time. And Notre Dame's sitting good with both of them. They've got Al Golan, their linebacker coach, both recruiting them. So I think they've got the right people going after him. And again, I don't know where that NIL stuff comes in with either one of them, but it looks like Notre Dame's doing well right now. Again, it looked like they're doing okay with Meadows a while back, and all of a sudden he's off to LSU. So I guess you just never know. Even when they commit, you never know until signing day. And then you've got them just a few months. If they're not happy with spring ball, they could transfer to another school. So it's a different world we're living in right now.
Okay. Well, yeah, it does sound like Madden is going to commit sooner than Boateng. I know that Owusu-Boateng would like to wait all the way till signing day, but I think if he's going to Notre Dame, they'd love for him to commit earlier to kind of help finish off the class and do it in style. Back to the wide receiver questions, though, Tom. What's the solution short term with this class? Now, Notre Dame has said that they're going to try to flip Derek Meadows and continue to recruit him. First of all, do you think it's worth it and that they can flip him?
I think it's worth it for sure. He's a big time ball player. I've seen him the last couple of years. Bishop Gorman's an annual stop for me. And he's got height. He can run a 4.4 something, 4.49. And a guy that size and that speed is an impact ball player, 5-star really. He's 5-star because he's got the height, the speed, the production at a big time school. So he'd be an impact player at Notre Dame. LSU probably the same, although they get some great wide receivers all the time, and there's some really good ones in the state of Louisiana on a yearly basis. So I do think Notre Dame's probably going to keep working on him. And you just never know. These guys are flipping left and right. It's tough to keep track of them, not only in college, but in high school. I ran into some kids in Florida a little while ago that have been at 4 different high schools. So like I said, it's a different world, and you got to kind of keep track. And Notre Dame has the right people going after these guys. I do think that they do a great job staying on top of the guys, getting on them early, and then bringing them in. I know Notre Dame fans are a little upset. I had already said they're not. You can always tell Notre Dame's not going to wind up in the top 5, but they're very close. And I think they're better than a lot of the analysts are saying they are. But when guys commit real early, like Notre Dame seems to have more than other schools, they lose their effectiveness in recruiting. You notice the big names that are uncommitted become bigger because people are talking about them more and they get a lot more attention. But a lot of the guys that committed early Notre Dame are really 4-stars with 3-star ratings by the internet sites. And you'll see that once they get to South Bend, that they are big-time ball players. I've seen them all in person. I mean, I'm not a genius at this, but when you see them all and you get a collective opinion like I do, been around so long, I talk to high school coaches, college coaches, sports writers, and I'm able to ascertain really the guys from the impact ball players and the guys that are just somewhat big on publicity and not big on production.
So recruits are going to be able to see Mike Denbrock's offense at Notre Dame. They were the number 1 offense at LSU last year, both scoring and yards per game. And then they'll be able to see Mike Brown and how he works with the receivers at Notre Dame. So I'm thinking, is that enough time to impact the 2025 cycle, or is that really going to be the messaging for 2026? Hey, look at our offense now. We've got a new coordinator, and this is how you're going to look as a wide receiver in our offense. What do you think about that?
They got enough time if the ball players are willing to, switch schools that late in the year. And a lot of them are. Again, the combination of Mike Denbrock doing a great job with so wide receivers should make an impact, because I don't know if there's any lights out guy. I don't know how the transfers are going to be. Perhaps they could really take off. They got some really good tight end prospects, and Flanagan's coming in next year, and he's another one. So they always do well. They got some very good running backs. They got great offensive line talent, but they have to be developed. So that kind of, the jury's still out there. But talent-wise, that offensive line, I think, is absolutely loaded, more so than all the other positions. And I do think at quarterback, they're fairly loaded now, too. Geno's done a tremendous job high school-wise and also portal-wise. So I do think that he's got some tools to work with, and the quarterbacks can make the wide receivers look even better than they are. So I'm very anxious to see how Coach Denbrock implements the offense, and also makes everybody work towards one goal, which is an explosive offense. LSU might have had more talent this past year, but overall, I think Notre Dame's fairly close.
We got an offensive line question coming up, but I wanted to finish up with the wide receiver segment. Is there anybody out there in the 2025 cycle that's not committed, or somebody that you think is flippable that Notre Dame should go after? Is there anybody that really strikes you off the top of your head?
Wide receiver wise?
Yeah, in the 2025 cycle.
Well, maybe just Hines and Meadows guys that
okay.
They were leaning with those guys in the past. So that means they really had a soft spot in their heart for Notre Dame until something happened near the end. So I do think there's other wide receivers out there, but I would say you don't go after average guys. They got too many of them on the team already. Maybe wait until the portal again when that opens up for next year. But I always remember Coach Willingham and Coach Weiss and even Coach Kelly at times. When it looks like they're suffering near the end, they go after average players almost to a person. They all wind up transferring anyway. It's not. So I think it's best to wait to see what you can get out of the portal, and then go after all the 4 or 5 stars next year. And like I mentioned before, go after twice as many as you've been going after, since it hasn't worked with the limited number you went after this year. I think go after twice as many, and they're capable of landing some big time names. And from year to year, wide receiver is the most loaded position of any position nationally. They're all over the place. Kids want to play wide receiver more so than cornerback or safety or any other spot. They want to be a wide receiver, and sometimes maybe go after athletic quarterbacks that aren't quite good at quarterback but can run a 500 meters, and you could go after, pick the athletes. Notre Dame, Lou Holtz was great. Eric Parsegian was fantastic at that switching guys from position to position where they might fit in a little bit better, but putting that athletic ability towards good use at a wide receiver.
Okay. We're going to get into talking about Tom's prep football report here in a second, but we'll take a offensive line question first. And this is from Blyberg, if I'm not butchering your name. Question: I would love to know Tom's thoughts on Will Black and Matty Augustine. And Tom is frozen up, so I'm going to soft shoe it here until we get him back. Tom may need to kind of come in and come back out. Let's try that and see if that works. Okay, we've lost Tom, so hopefully he will come back in. Keep the questions coming. I don't think that question was an overly difficult question. I'm going to try to text him. This is sometimes what you get when somebody's on the road. So we will try to. We will try to get Tom back here. I'm just texting him. What in the world did I do here? There we go. Okay. There we go. We lost you for a minute. So we had a question on Will Black and Matty Augustine. Can you hear me, Tom? Hopefully you can hear me, or you can read the question at the bottom of the page. Word. Tom, can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Eric?
Yes.
My
can you
phone
hear
overheated. My
can
phone
you hear
overheated.
me? Oh, okay.
So
your phone overheated.
Yeah, I had it up on the steering wheel, and it said, and the temperature in the phone overheated. So now I'm going to keep it a little lower.
Okay. So the question is, I would love Tom's thoughts on Will Black and Matty Augustine.
Well, I think they're outstanding. I think all three of the offensive linemen they've got, they're all tackle prospects, but athletic enough, especially Will Black, to play guard. And I do think that I went out to see those guys about a year ago out in Connecticut, and I saw them the same day, in fact. And Matty Augustine, Will Black, Black has the ability to be a 5-star, and most people have him that way right now also. But he's got great feet, both technically sound, both about 6'7", so they got the great size, length, great size, long arms, quick feet. So, and Owens has the same thing. He's 6'8". So I think, because they are athletic enough that one or two of them could possibly move inside, because they seem to be overloaded with tackle prospects. And I think they need more guards. And again, Quentin Nelson was a tackle in high school, tackle at Notre Dame, but obviously he's proved to be one of the greatest guard prospects in NFL history. So if you're athletic enough, you could play tackle or guard. But I think Joe Rudolph's done an excellent job with the offensive linemen. Now it's just a matter of developing all of them, because they've got some big-time talent. The kid from Wisconsin, kid from Ohio, these are guys that are very athletic, very heavily recruited. They never have a problem recruiting tight ends or offensive linemen. And now with Gino at quarterback coach, don't seem to have trouble recruiting quarterbacks. So, and also Mike Mickens, I think, is maybe right now the top DB coach in the country when it comes to recruiting.
Okay, we have another offensive line question. Well, this is a wide receiver question. Who's the last highly rated wide receiver we've had success with? I can't remember. It does seem like some of the more highly rated guys haven't done as well, and then the ones that have been good. I mean, Will Fuller, where did you have him ranked, Tom? Did you have him high?
Yeah, I did have him high because he came to San Antonio for our combine for the Army game, and I met him by the Alamo. I remember that. I met a lot of guys by the Alamo, and he was one of them. So, yeah, Will Fuller was high because he can run. He was always super fast in high school. So I didn't know he's going to be. I didn't even have a 5-star, but he was a 4-star plus back then, and probably should have had him as a 5 because he was an impact ball player at Notre Dame. And Michael Floyd was a 5-star. And I think that's been the last time I ranked a wide receiver with 5 stars was Michael Floyd. Tim Brown also. I can't remember if Tim. Well, I went and saw Tim Brown, and he was a quarterback in high school, so he was a 4-star plus guy back in '83. And I went and saw Tim, and he was a quarterback on a team that was 0-9, I believe, down in Dallas. Real good kid, but he was the kind of guy that. You recruit. He was recruited by Jerry Faust, and it was actually their DB coach at the time that recruited him and thought that he might be a guy that could be switched from quarterback to wide receiver. And obviously that worked out very, very well.
Okay, we have a comment. Eric dealt with the technical problems like a champ. I thought he was going to screw it up big time. Well, thank you for the confidence. I was about ready. Go ahead. I was about ready to read the phone book. One more offensive line question, and then I want to get into the prep football report. But keep the questions coming because we're going to get to all these. How many games will it take before the offensive line gets and reaches its potential? So Tom, this is out of your wheelhouse a little bit, but you've seen offensive lines over the years. So let's assume that the people that win the jobs that are open are Emil Wagner and Rocco Spindler. So you would have a line of Wagner, you'd have Billy Schrouth, Ashton Craig, Rocco Spindler, and Charles Jagasa. So how long into the season do you think it's going to be before they really start hitting their stride?
It better be the first game or they're going to be in trouble. I've actually been down there because I got the top 75 players in Texas meeting me a couple hours before the game in College Station. But I do think that they're starting off with a really tough team. It's going to be Coach Elko's first game at A&M. You got that crazy crowd down there. So they better be ready the first game because, and I know we're talking about offensive line. That's the position that takes, along with quarterback, the longest to develop most of the time. So hopefully they've gelled for this past 9 months before they get to the game and work really hard because A&M's not going to be relentless. And, Elko's a great defensive guy. So the offensive line is going to be seeing a lot of stunting, a lot of blitzing, and hopefully they'll be ready for it. But you just never know. I'm not a coach, but I do know the time it normally takes for an offensive line to gel. And it usually will take a couple of years together, to be dominating. So hopefully it's a little less than that for this group.
So we're going to segue into the prep football report. So how many years have you been putting out this huge recruiting guide? What is it, 300 pages?
No, 200 this year, 240 something pages. It's ready. It's at the printer. It'll be mailed this week. But it wasn't that way when I started. My first travel was 1978. I went and saw Dan Marino, Eric Dickerson during the fall. I called John Elway on the phone. I couldn't drive all the way out to California back in those days because I was sleeping in my car 1 or 2 out of every 3 days to save money. But then I had 6 pages stapled together to make it 12 back in 79 when I had a wrap up with those guys. And it gradually grew over the past 25 years to 240 something pages. It was always over 100 pages for the past 40 years, but it used to be 3 different sections. So now it's a big book, and I try to, everybody that like Notre Dame recruits and almost all the major schools, I have their profiles and what they've told me. I see everyone in person. I think that's always been Gil Brandt had told me way back when we were doing a Mike Godfrey charity thing about 35 years ago. Gill, the big famous scout with the Dallas Cowboys. He's the one that gave me that star system, by the way, 30 years ago also. But he was telling me, too, the key is go see these guys in person. So I do that. I think I'm the only person in the country that still sees them all, including coaches. And I don't like seeing them at combines because all they do is run around cones. A lot of them don't even perform at combines. They just show up and talk. We used to do that at the Army combine. All the good players rarely ever performed. They just stood around there and we signed them up for the next year's game. But I think the key is, obviously, when you evaluate players, nobody's perfect, but you look for their size and speed to fit the position they're being recruited at. And the other things are you look at their high school production. That's real important. Kids that aren't performing great in high school, like I mentioned with the wide receivers that are averaging 12 or 13 yards in high school, they're never going to be great in college for 99% of the time. The guys that have great production, and also then when I sit down, I ask the one thing, I want to know their heart. How much does football mean to you? Is it a means to an end, means to an education, means to NIL money nowadays? Or do you really love the sport? You want to work really hard in college, get to the NFL, because that's the final ingredient that you only can find out really when you're sitting down talking to them and looking them in the eye. And when you put all that together, you could come out with a 3 or 4 or 5 star ball player according to all those ingredients. So I've been doing that since 78 and 79. And like I said, that's how the NFL works. So it takes a lot of time. You're sitting in your car, your phone's overheating sometimes. And I actually enjoy it because I always have 40 pages in the magazine of my travels. Historically, I write about that. I had Bon Jovi hold up the magazine last year when I had dinner with John a year ago. And this year, Urban Meyer, Jim Caviezel, got everybody kind of in the magazine talking about the magazine. Urban said he came to my house 1988 as a GA at Ohio State. Mac Brown told me he came to my house to watch film in 1979 as a assistant coach at Iowa State. And that's when he was coaching Vinny Serrato. He was a wide receiver coach at Iowa State. It all comes back full circle. Throughout the 80s and 90s, I allowed every coach in the country come to my house, never charged a penny, but I would collect VHS tapes during my travels. So in the month of May, they all came over and watched film. And Sean Payton, Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, all the guys that are now in the NFL or in college as head coaches used to come by. That's how I'm able to kind of get that collective opinion down when it comes to evaluations.
So if you want to order Tom's either the digital version or the print version, I've got the website right here under my face, tomlemmingprepfootball.com. And I'm going to put it in the show notes afterwards for people that watch the replay that aren't here with us live. Tom, is there anything else you want to say about the digital or the print version of Prep Football Report?
Just go because it's on Twitter at Lemming Report. And they can just go to that and at Lemming, just lemmingreport.com. Search how technically sound I am. Lemmingreport.com, and they have everything on there. They could get either digital or January issue, March. But the Underclass magazine is going to be ready in 1 month with talking about all the top 2026 prospects. And I've seen almost all of them in the nation also. So that's where they travel around the country, pays big dividends. And you see everybody. And again, not only Notre Dame, but I'll kind of talk with everybody. I never ask a college for their evaluations. I just, at the most, I'll ask them for phone numbers if I don't have them of the kids, but I like to make my own evaluations. And again, even though it's my own, it comes collectively from people I've talked to.
Okay. Steve has a question regarding the Prep Football Report. What position nationally are considered the strongest and the weakest position groups, I think he means, in this cycle?
It's always wide receiver, Steve. It's loaded everywhere. That's where you can never go wrong with wide receivers.
Don't say that. It happened.
I know, because I don't think they had enough guys that were going after. I think they'll adjust for next year and bring in enough, because there's some big-time ball players everywhere I go. Just in North Carolina, I just had 30 players come by. 11 of them were wide receivers, because they seem to be the guys that are jumping out at you a little bit earlier than most people also, or just athletes that will wind up at wide receiver. I think that position's loaded. The one weakest position I was running back, because when I started in the late 70s, the first year was Eric Dickerson. The second year was Herschel Walker. The third year is Bo Jackson. Then you got Marcus Dupree. All these big guys that are running 10-4, 10-500 meters, you don't find them anywhere. Then there was like a 20-year drop off to Adrian Peterson. And now you're just having trouble finding because nowadays, since the NFL, and everything's a trickle-down effect, the NFL is not utilizing the wide receivers the way they used to 30 years ago. So a lot of the guys that have that size and speed are playing linebacker or defensive end so they can get recruited more. And, they watch in the NFL and the pass rushers, the outside linebackers, the defensive ends are getting paid a lot more money now than a lot of the running backs. So that's why you see these guys switching. That's the weakest position. But I think wide receiver is loaded. You always have enough tight ends, offensive linemen. Another position that's tough is find really good defensive linemen. Chicago's loaded for next year like they were this year. And I think Notre Dame, if they're looking for defensive linemen, 4 and 5 stars, all you got to do is go to Chicago the last couple of years. I mean, they lost most of them. Justin Scott, they had some big-time guys. Miami got 2 of the big ones last year. And Notre Dame got a couple of really good ones this year. Next year, there's going to be 3 or 4 and 5 star type defensive linemen. The year after that, the top defensive lineman in Chicago is Chris Zorch's godfather. So you figure Notre Dame would have. Chris Zorch is the godfather. So you figure Notre Dame's going to have a real good shot at him, too. He's out of Brother Rice High School in Chicago.
We got questions coming up from Jeff and Blyberg. Keep the questions coming. I'm going to ask you one, Tom. What's typically the easiest position group to evaluate where you hit that? And what's the most difficult position group to evaluate?
Same as recruiting. Wide receivers are very easy. You can watch them in high school. If they're averaging over 20 yards a catch and they're running sub 11 flat 100 meters and they got length, then you got a great player there because he's got that production and the great length, great size. Then you can see a guy like Will Fuller who's about 5'10", but Will can run a 4.3, and he had great production as an athlete in high school. So you can see that. That's the easiest position. Offensive lineman's difficult because in high school they could dominate because of size and great. Here comes a train right in front of me here. So, but anyway, you might hear the horn going. But so they have offensive lineman is very difficult, and I think quarterback's not as difficult. You can see a quarterback too if he's got the size, the arm strength. Then it comes down to coaching once they get to college. I've seen some great quarterbacks over the years. The best one I've seen ever was Jeff George, better than Peyton Manning, better than Tom Brady in high school. Although I was the only guy to have Tom Brady as an All-American. John Gruden reminded me of that because John was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders at the time with Billy Callahan as an offensive coordinator. And they used to let me have all the kids meet at their facilities in Alameda. And I had Brady come by that one year. Billy Callahan's son, who's now the head coach, I think, of Tennessee, was one of the quarterbacks in that group over there. And so I do think quarterbacks easy to evaluate in high school. You can see the great ones, the great arm strength like a Jeff George or Pete like that. But also then it comes down to how you get developed once you get to college. Like I said, see some great quarterbacks fall by the wayside, either because they're not getting coached well or they're impatient and they want to leave a program because they're not starting right away, and they bounce around like Mitch Mustain bounced around from Arkansas to USC to the Chicago White Sox. Mustain was a talent. He was as talented that year as Tim Tebow and Matt Stafford and Javon Sneed and Josh Freeman. All those guys came out that same year. I had them all meet me in San Antonio. But Mitch chose a different path. He started as a true freshman for Houston at Arkansas, but wasn't happy he wasn't throwing enough as a freshman, and he took off for USC, where they already had 5 All-Americans. So sometimes quarterback-wise, ego-wise, they'll jump ship quickly, and sometimes that really hurts them.
Okay, we got a question from Jeff Stevens. Tom, how do you see the 2026 players from Arizona? I know lots of coaches recruited here last year. So what do you think about the 2026 cycle in Arizona? I
had the top 25 2026 kids meet me in April, but the number 1 kid, Tony Cumberland, he left. He's no longer there. He committed to Oregon. He's a defensive lineman, one of the best in the country. And I had all the kids meet at his high school there in Scottsdale. And all of a sudden, I just found out a couple weeks ago, he left and he committed to Oregon, and somehow he got placed up in Oregon. He's playing high school ball in Eugene. But I don't know how that happened, but he's up there now. So they lost their 5-star defensive lineman But overall, I think it's going to be a good year. There's some really good linebackers. There's a real good quarterback who's also a great baseball player in Phoenix. So I think, and then the school where Creed Thomas is coming from and Morrison came from, Brophy Prep, they've got 4 or 5 really good ball players. So that coach is doing a great job. And I think you'll see a lot of stars coming out of Brophy Prep, as you will. Suero High School and Hamilton High School. Those seems to be the schools that are zooming in for the next couple of years.
Okay, we have a question. When did Tom notice the decline in Western Pennsylvania and high-end recruits? At what time it was a juggernaut? So have you seen a decline in Western PA, and what caused that, and when was that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Eric. I saw a massive decline in Western PA. There were still really good ball players. When I was coming out, when I started doing it, Jimbo Culvert and Dan Marino and Mark May, a lot of those great players from the area, Chuck Williams, there were some big time ball players. And I think with the decline of the blue collar ball players, Dave Wannstedt and I would meet for lunch when he was head coach at Pitt. And where the football offices now, they're connected with the Steelers. We'd sit there having lunch, and he told me the history of the area. He lived right above the cliff by the football offices in a little wooden house. And where the football office is now was a steel mill. His dad worked there his whole life, and Dave worked there while he was summertime in between going to the University of Pittsburgh. And he said all the top guys from that neighborhood were coming down. They'd go to Pitt, and some would go to Penn State. Notre Dame get some great quarterbacks, Terry Hanratty and Tommy Clements and Joe Montana out of that area. I think Johnny Lujak might have come from that area too. Johnny Unitas came from Jim Kelly. So it's a massive drop off. There's still good players, but nothing like it used to be in the 40s and 50s and 60s and early and 70s. By the 80s, most of the steel mills were gone. The blue collar kids had moved on, or their families had moved on someplace else where they could find a similar job. And I did see a decline coming up by the late 80s, and it's kind of continued. Tony Dorsett's from that area. I mean, there's some great ball players. Mike Ditka from Eloquip. I like Dorsett. You just don't see those kind of great players anymore. Sean Gilbert was one of the last great ones that come out of there. They've had a few. The one who just retired from the Rams is from Western PA. And some people say Aaron Donald, arguably the greatest defensive line, who I put in our very first Semper Fi game. That year I selected the Army team, and then I switched over to the Marines. And because he was short, a lot of people didn't want him, and we brought him over to our game where he dominated in Phoenix that year. So that's a good question. It has gone downhill. There's still some players, and same thing. You can see that in Eastern Ohio, Youngstown, to some effect, Cleveland, but definitely Akron, Youngstown. I've seen a major drop off in talent in those areas also.
Okay. There was a question here. Boy, they're flying by. So I'm going to go to this one because I'll find the other one. Tom, did you ever consider a job with the university or an NFL team?
I've been offered by some coaches, and I don't know if they were legit offers. Some guys would say, hey, boy, if I get an opening, could you come here, this or that? But I was doing too well back in those days, and now I'm too old to do it. But I had been offered by I would say maybe 5 or 6 schools during the 80s and 5 or 6 during the 90s that I would come and head up their recruiting. But then I would lose the advantage of traveling the country, seeing everybody in person, because there's rules in colleges that I don't have to abide by. There was a rule. There's a Tom Lemming rule in the NCAA, and it started 2001. Al Groh had just left the New York Jets to become head coach of his alma mater at the University of Virginia. That's where I met Al Golden in 2001. He was one of the first assistants hired by Al Groh. Anyway, we did a big thing on campus because up until 2001, I was having all the kids meet me on campuses and do stuff. And then because Al Groh made such a big deal about it with the newspapers and everything else, a day later, 2 guys that later became my co-host, Frank Beamer and Phil Fuller, turned it into the NCAA that it was an unfair advantage to the colleges. So the next year was a rule. If I do it on campus, they have to leave campus before they can come back and talk to the college coaches. So now that's why I do a lot of them. I can still do it on college campus. They just can't see the players. And see, that's why if I was coaching, I wouldn't be able to do stuff like that. I have to just invite them. Notre Dame's got a disadvantage one way because there's very little talent in northern Indiana. So, if you're in Ohio State or Texas, you got talent all over you. Chicago should be their backyard, but Eric, you did a great story about how Notre Dame has sort of let Chicago go under Kelly, which is a massive mistake. When they won in 80, every year when they win, loaded with Chicago. Last time in '88, they had Joe Allen and Lindsey Knapp and Tim Grunard on offensive line. Kent Graham was the backup quarterback. You had Chris Zorich and Jeff Allman, George Streeter, and Samson Magala. All these guys starting for Notre Dame when they won. And then all of a sudden, Bob Davies started the day. He never went to Chicago at all. It didn't seem like much. Tyrone kind of continued it. Coach Weiss a little bit, but I think they're going back into Chicago now. They realize that Chicago kids are more likely, since they're only an hour away, to maybe stick with Notre Dame when things aren't looking good or going bad instead of transferring right away. And I do think that they're a little bit more loyal only because of distance from home. And Notre Dame has such a strong standing in the Chicago area that I was surprised over the past 30 years to see how they just let it slide. And Chicago right now has 65 guys in the NFL, only 2 from Notre Dame, Komet and Love. And the reason is Tommy Rees had Chicago, but he didn't really recruit Chicago, even though he's from it. He did get Riley Mills. That's about it in a 5 or 6 year period. While all the other guys were heading off to other schools and then to the NFL, a good number of them. So hopefully, I think Coach Freeman's he's a very smart recruiter, and I think he realizes how important Chicago is. So I'd be surprised if they don't bring in 4 or 5 guys a year from now on.
Mikhail Blade from the Chicago area was one of the kids that was at the Grill and Chill event on Thursday, defensive lineman from Chicago. Do you think Notre Dame will get him? Do you think that they should go after him hard?
Well, they are going after him hard. They're going after the Jones kid from Mount Carmel hard, 2 of the best defensive linemen in the country. And even Gabe Hill, another one who I think is going to be an outstanding defensive tackle. He's 6'2", 260. He'll be 280, 290. He can run. He's got great feet, and I like him a lot too. J.C. Anderson's a tight end south of Chicago, but he also plays defensive end, and he's a terrific athlete. There's some really good ball players along the defensive line or tight end wise too that they're going after. I think they've offered all of these guys. It's a matter of perseverance. You got to go after these guys as sophomores. You build a reputation. You get them on campus as many times as possible so they're not only familiar with the coaching staff, but also the academic staff, the janitors, everybody that's around the area. Talk to them nice. They develop relationships, and then they feel more comfortable traveling an hour from home. And I think that Chris Zorich one time, Chris Zorich's mom called me one time. Chris was so homesick, and he's only 1 hour away when he was at CBS, that Mom called, asked if I talked to him because he was kind of crying. He wanted to come home as a freshman. So it shows you distance from home means a lot. And when you're only an hour away, it's a lot easier to go home just for a day or so than it is if you lived in Houston or Los Angeles or Miami or places like that. So I do think that it's important to head it, and hopefully they can identify the kids in Chicago and count it as their home team instead of, Michigan's got Detroit, Ohio State's got the whole state of Ohio. Notre Dame got Chicago, really. Northwestern doesn't have the imp that Notre Dame has. Either does Iowa or Wisconsin or Illinois. It should be Notre Dame's for the taking, but it's for the taking. And they, not to say they had lazy recruiters over the past 30 years, but these guys weren't exactly whirlwinds.
Okay, we have a question from Blyberg again. How many miles a year does Tom drive? LOL. I don't know if that's an LOL, and sometimes you even fly to Hawaii. So how many miles?
I drive all 48 states. That many. I drive New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine just for the scenery. And Brian Butterfield, the old third base coach of the Cubs, the Yankee, lives in Maine, so I like to go see him. And but the rest of them is all for football. And I do go to Hawaii, try to go every 3-4 years, make sure I see everybody. Alaska doesn't. I went there one time to Alaska. They don't really have players. I don't remember the last Division I guy football-wise that came out of there. But I drive 60,000 miles in about a 6-month period. I try not to do anything during the summer months. And the only reason I went to Duke as an obligation the next 4 days, because I usually just write both magazines during the summer, try to get as up-to-date as possible before they go out. I updated the magazine just this past Friday. So everybody's committed up to 2 days. Yesterday is all going to be in the magazine that's coming out this week. So 60,000 miles. I enjoy it as long as I stay healthy. I'm 70 years old now, so it's been going for quite a while. So it'll be 46 years where I take the trips this coming October, that 78 trip. But I actually was doing stuff the year and the 2 years before that, and but not really going to see the players. I was ranking them and just driving around, talking to individual, but not a whole big group of players. So it's been going for quite a while, and I really enjoy doing it. I probably will never retire. You'll just one day see me drive off a cliff by accident in Utah, and they'll discover my body sometime when the April thaw happens. So,
okay, Utah it is. We have a question from David Knight. This question is going way back. CPA Carlos Pierre-Antoine was the Gatorade Defensive Player of the Year. At 6'4", 250, he never started a game for ND. What happened?
I don't know, because he was one of my All-Americans too. And back in those days, I had a big hand in USA Today and Gatorade. They always threw the names by me. He was a big-time ball player. There's a lot that happens. I always say if you get 10 five-star players, 5 will make it. 5 won't be as good as people think because of injuries, grades, off-the-field problems. And there's things like that happen all the time. So nobody can understand. He was a great athlete. He was nationally recruited. When everybody else thinks the guy's great, then he's great. But again, there's a lot that happens between your high school senior year and your college senior year that can't be explained at times. And again, it's not just performance on the field, but there's a lot of other reasons why a ball player doesn't live up to his potential. But he was a big time guy. Really, I thought he was a great high school player. There's a lot of them too. Some guys like Max Redmond, that I never had him as a 5-star. I went up to Mission Viejo and all the places, and I didn't think he was that good. Some people had him as a 5-star. So a lot of it is apples and oranges. I'm sure there's some 5-stars that I like that some people say he's not that good. Again, that's why people really follow recruiting. There's no exact science to any of this. And that's why I say the best way to do it is see guys in person, talk to them about their heart. Because once they get to college and all of a sudden they're running into guys as big and fast as they are, then it comes down to heart and determination and hard work as to who's going to be the better of those two great prospects. And a lot of times people don't understand the heart of the ball player. You know, he's a great athlete, but once he gets into situations that he doesn't know how to handle right away, all of a sudden, I think that's where the heart comes out, and that determines the greatness of a ball player.
Okay. Are there differences in regional perceptions that kids have of ND? Southwest versus Midwest versus Southeast? I mean, what's your sense of that geographically, how kids perceive Notre Dame in different parts of the country?
Notre Dame's name is big everywhere, but Taylor Bell and I did this back in the 80s and 90s. Twice we did it. We asked my top 100 kids that I saw, what state is Notre Dame in? And less than 50% knew it was Indiana. So they know about Notre Dame's magic. They know about the Gipper, and they know about Newt Rockne and Rudy. But a lot of times they don't know where the school is. It's sort of it's got a mythology about it that's kind of through the roof. But they don't know about their great academics sometimes. That's why they got to be told. Whenever I heard a coach over the past 40 years say, Notre Dame sells itself, then you know that coach is going to be failing at Notre Dame. It doesn't sell itself. You got to tell people how great it is academically. How many guys, I think the job placement is like 99 to 9/10%. How many kids, and the thing that they started under Lou Holtz, you're not going there for 4 years. It's for 40 years you're there, which is true for Notre Dame. I've never seen too many down and out Notre Dame grads. They always seem to be wealthy or well off because they took advantage of the academics at Notre Dame, but also the tradition. How many guys, how many Heisman Trophy winners, how many national titles, how many players are they putting into the NFL? And now with this new athletic director, great facilities. They're going to have state of the art when this new building is built. They've got everything going for them at Notre Dame. And I even like their high academic standards. They're not that high, but they're higher than almost everyone else this side of Stanford. And if they only go after 70 of the top 100 players, so what? They're Notre Dame. They should be able to get a top 5 class out of those 70 if they're doing the job and doing things right. As I said, Notre Dame's got a lot to offer. And whenever they fail, and people have excuses, we can't get them into school, that's how we lost them, or this or that. That's all excuses, and bad excuses, to be honest with you. If you're doing the job, you're going to have a great class every year at Notre Dame, because it is an easy sell once the kids realize what they have to offer and how much that could impact their future. The smart kids, and you don't want the other kids coming anyway. The soldier of fortune type kids, where there seems to be a good number of now because of NIL, because they're ready to jump ship within the first bad thing that happens to them. You want guys that are loyal to the program and that will help promote the program, and guys that'll work hard to earn that starting position. So I just think Notre Dame is a sleeping giant. It always has been. Obviously, they won several national titles. They always do great. And I think under Marcus Freeman, they have the right guy. I just think it's a matter of everything falling into place, staff-wise, player-wise, and I think in the next couple of years, it's all going to come together.
Okay, we're running out of time. We're going to kind of do a lightning round. If you have any more questions, real quick, but I've got a couple I wanted to get to. We talked about the two linebackers. We talked about the wide receivers. Really, the only other thing in the 2025 cycle is a safety. It looks like Notre Dame is zeroing in on Brandon Logan, a Vanderbilt baseball recruit from Fort Wayne Snyder High School. Tom, what do you think about Brandon Logan as an athlete joining Notre Dame's class?
I didn't see him when I went to Fort Wayne. I should have, but I didn't know a whole lot about him. At least it'll help the baseball program if he comes. But again, it looks like they're reaching. That's the impression I get. They're reaching, and I don't think Notre Dame should reach. I think save it for transfers or for next year. Although now I think with the new rules, you could have 105 guys on the team, so I don't think they even have to worry about that. So it might not be as long of a reach as you're thinking it is now. As much depth as you can add. If they must like him. He wasn't a guy they were after early, so I think whenever you come after a guy this late, it normally means it's a reach and they're just taking a chance. So why not take a chance? He's a guy that, like I said, it looks like the baseball program needs as much help as they can get. So that would help out two different teams at Notre Dame.
I get this question a lot. People kind of sweat whether Deuce Knight is going to keep his commitment all the way through signing day. What's your sense of that?
It all comes down to the integrity of Deuce Knight. I talk to you about things. I think he's from southern Mississippi. It's not a well-off area. I've been to that high school many times. And it comes down to the integrity of Deuce and his parents. He gave his word. He's coming to Notre Dame. They built everything around him. He's calling the prospects. I didn't like that area. I said the same about him and CJ May when they both committed. And they lost CJ right away to NIL. And I do think that Deuce seems like he's got a lot of integrity, and he's the kind of kid that they could build a program around. He's a great athlete, has to be developed. He would go to the right program with Denbrock, who just developed the same type of quarterback who was talented but erratic at Arizona State, and then wins a Heisman. I think he knows that he could possibly win a Heisman when it's his time and his call at Notre Dame under Mike Denbrock. But again, I don't know what the lure of NIL is with a kid from southern Mississippi, which very few Catholic schools, down in that area. It's more of an SEC type area, Auburn, Ole Miss, LSU type of an area. LSU's got their quarterback, so you don't have to worry about them. But I always say worry about Ole Miss and Auburn when you're down in, and normally Alabama, but they got their guy too. So normally in that area, you worry about those three schools.
Damari Simeon is a 2026 defensive lineman who got an offer during the grill and chill. Tom, have you seen Damari Simeon? Do you have an opinion of him?
I've seen him on film. He's on my next kind of trip. What I'm doing, like I said before, August 31st, I'm going to have top 75 guys in Texas meeting at College Station. A couple weeks after that, all the top Florida, South Georgia guys meeting in Gainesville for a game. And then I got Ohio State, Penn State. I'm doing 9 of those over the year. He looks really good on film. And Notre Dame really needs help along the defensive line because they could have almost that whole line leave after this year. And I think there's a lot of question marks for the defensive line also. That's why I said Chicago is very important. The ball player down in Florida is very important. I think that's leaning their way at IMG. I think next year, wide receiver and defensive line are the two positions you really got to worry about, where Notre Dame's got to come up very big at those two spots if they want to continue their great success. So I think he's good. You can get him. But I think they should come after a good number of those guys at those positions. And if they can't play, if they're defensive ends, with Notre Dame's scheme, can play outside linebacker also. So I think it's very important. So answer your question, I think he's a big-time ball player, a legit 4-star player.
Okay, we're going to end our question and answer part with a historical question. Tim Brown or Rocket Ismail? Which one do you take, and what happens if they were on the same team?
Boy, that's really apples and oranges, but I loved Rocket Ismail. I should have won the Heisman over the BYU quarterback. That was sort of, I don't know how he lost it to Ty Detmer, but he did, because Ishmael had a phenomenal year. He had a better year than Tim Brown did in '87. So Rocket Ismail is the most explosive player I've ever seen at Notre Dame. A little smaller than Tim. He went to Canada instead of going to the NFL right away, which I thought. I just was with Rocket a couple of years ago in Dallas. He lives in Dallas now, and what a phenomenal player for Notre Dame. And I think I would have to say, if I had a gun to my head, it would have been I would take Rocket Ismail over Tim Brown. But again, it's so close with two of the greatest players in Notre Dame history.
Okay, we're going to let you know about our promo code for our premium content at InsideNDSports.com. You can go to our website and sign up for a 30-day free trial. And we also want to thank Legacy Heating and Air for sponsoring today's show, as they do each week. Want to thank Tom for coming along, and we're going to put back up where you can get the Prep Football Report. And I've been reading this for decades now. One of the things that I really like about it, there's kind of a lot of behind the scenes stuff about the kid's family background or other athletic endeavors that you don't see in a lot of the internet stories. And it really is good. Tom does a really good job of asking the right kinds of questions that make these bios really interesting. And years later, it's really fun to kind of look back at these guys and see what the snapshot looked like when they were recruits. Tom, anything you'd like to add other than you have a wonderful purple shirt on today?
I know, and it's all full of sweat too. It's 91 degrees here, but yeah, see, I look back all the time only with the guys I rated high. If I missed on them, I usually don't do anything retrospectively at all. I say, oh, how did I miss that guy? Because starting in '78, the very next year I saw Reggie White at Howard High School in Chattanooga. I've seen most of the great ones. Sometimes I don't rank them as high as they should have been ranked. I did have Emmett Smith as my '86 National Player of the Year. Jerome Bettis was my '89 Offensive Player of the Year, and Oliver Gibson defense. Although Bryant Young surpassed him, making the Hall of Fame. But again, that was another year. I talked about the last time Notre Dame should have won a national title was '93, and look at the defensive line of Brian Hamilton and Oliver Gibson and Bryant Young, all from Chicago. Pete Bursich from Chicago. They were loaded up on Chicago guys that year too. And again, hopefully they'll be smart enough to go after some of those 65 guys every few that are in the NFL from Chicago area. But again, they could just my magazine will be ready this week. Digital will be out in another day or two, and the magazine will be mailed at the end of the week. And they could just go to Tom Lemming, TomLemmingPrepFootball.com.
Which we have on the screen. Tom, thanks for joining us today. And Tyler James will be back next week. We'll have a training camp edition coming next week. Training camp starts Wednesday with the first full practice. Marcus Freeman press conference afterwards. Stay tuned to Inside ND Sports. Thanks again, everybody.